And in my research, came across a lot of different definitions, but the one that really stood out to me most was from Jada Coleman's article, and it said that it is imagination restrained by evidence. So pretty much historical empathy, from what I've read and my interpretation, is just trying to view past events and people's decisions with a full knowledge of how they came to the decision. So it's learning about um, how they view the world, kind of their ideas, their mentalities, and all that kind of stuff, so that you not sympathize with them because you don't want to sympathize with them because then that changes your view of history, but so that you understand why they did certain things. So in all the articles that I read, they really kind of had three-part teaching models on how to teach historical empathy. So the three parts were mainly kind of a content knowledge gathering time period, where the students read primary and secondary articles, both about the people that they were studying and about the stuff that was going on around them, so they could kind of understand the context in which these people were living. Second part was then having the students participate in a Socratic debate, help them kind of go beyond the text and really go more into what was happening during the time period. So they would, again, just try to figure out as much as possible why people thought certain ways and why they did certain actions. And finally, all the articles that I read had the students do an individual paper to summarize what they read, what they learned, to really expand on ideas that they kind of come to and really extend those ideas beyond just classroom discussion. So in all the research that I've found, the students engaged in the content more deeply, put more time and effort into the different subjects, and were able to draw parallels with modern events when they really thought about the issues from a historical empathetic standpoint. So in the first article I read, was an article by Sarah Brooks. She's trying to provide an in-depth look at the place that historical empathy, both subjectively and objectively, has in a teacher's classroom and the student's response. So in this article, she used lectures, primary and secondary sources, and discussions to help her teach her students about the topics they were studying. And the researcher, Sarah Brooks, she observed the classroom, she read the student writings, and she interviewed the teachers and the four participating students to collect her data. She found that the teacher, Miss Gables, was successful in her methods to help develop historical empathy in her students, both in perspective recognition or more content areas and in care because they cared about what was happening. She showed that her goals for her students aligned well with what they learned and took away from it, but due to some of their care and other preconceived notions in presentism, the students still had some problems in viewing some events objectively and developing true historical empathy for them. So they ended up putting on their own presentism views instead of truly understanding what was happening. The second article I read by Jada Coleman, she wanted to see if using primary documents could help her students to engage better with women in history through the use of historical empathy. To do this, Coleman had her students study 3 women during the semester, including having them read in-depth articles on them, and using a reading web to expand their thoughts, having a Socratic debate to help the students go beyond the text, as well as having her students write an essay to further their own ideas that they developed. Coleman found that after, and I quote, "After 3 intensive experiences with historical empathy, my students recognized the differences between the historical period and the present, distinguished between the different points of view, and defended their analysis of the author's perspective with evidence from both the historic document and their prior knowledge." So again, she was very successful and found that it helped her students engage more, and was a big fan of using historical empathy in the classroom. A third article by Stuart Foster. He spent the first half of the article discussing his and other researchers' opinions and findings on historical empathy and what it truly is and isn't. He states that history is no fancy-free, let's imagine, let's pretend exercise in making it up. So pretty much he says this because he wants teachers to use historical empathy, but to be wary of turning that into sympathy, where students are suddenly viewing history and the events and the people with sympathy and just using pure emotion and not using facts and ignoring the facts, and instead using emotion to help to justify what these people have done. He goes on to outline 6 key facets that in his mind make up historical empathy. I read these in my paper. I'm going to take the time to read all of them right now, but they're pretty good in helping to understand what it is. So after his analysis, Foster outlines a potential lesson for teachers to use in the classroom to implement historical empathy that revolve around Neville Chamberlain and the tough choice that he had to take on a policy of non-aggression towards Hitler. And Foster, again, like the other 2 articles, used a 3-tiered system to help teach it. First with context and chronology, followed by historical evidence, and finally having students come up with a final supporting argument based on facts. He does have some criticisms and warnings about using historical empathy, but he's overall a big fan of it and thinks that it can be very impactful and engaging and helpful for students in the classroom. The fourth article is by Endicott and Peliconis. I'm not sure I pronounced the author's name. But in this article, they look into using a model of teaching to develop historic empathy through reading primary sources, participating in group activities and Socratic debates, and dialogue in order to help the students develop a more enduring understanding of social control of the ancient Athenians. The teacher, they call her Sophia, throughout the lesson makes a big push to help her students to draw parallels between our government and that of the democratic Athenians to help them see how systems that we use today evolved from their current government, from their government. So another big thing with historic empathy that I've taken away from these articles is that when done right, teachers can really do a good job of drawing parallels between what happened then and what happened now. Because students are understanding the ways people thought about things back then, they can see how the thinking has evolved and changed and been modified into the things we have today. Whether it's in government, whether it's in society, whether it's in different policies. Students really have a deeper understanding of how things worked then, so that since they understand how things work now somewhat, they can draw these connections and parallels and help out a teacher a little bit. So in this fourth article by Endicott and Peliconis, they found that through the debates and activities, students were better able to empathize with the decisions that the Athenians made, even if they disagreed with them. Or students engaged more with the material, they took more time and effort in developing their arguments and grounded them in facts, and they were even able to view the bigger picture historical themes from the time. So the final article, another one by Endicott. This time she is the teacher and the researcher in the article. She wanted to see how interrelated the cognitive and affective feelings were in historical empathy. So to do this, she presented students with three different major figures to study who struggled with what was the best thing to do, even if went against their beliefs. So George Mason, he was a Virginia senator, I believe, and he had problems with the Constitution and he kind of went against his Federalist beliefs, but at the same time he knew it was the best thing for the country. Thomas Jefferson and his debate on whether or not to purchase Louisiana, despite thinking that presidents should be less involved, have less power, less involvement. So kind of his internal debate with that, and finally James Madison and whether or not to go to war with the British in the War of 1812, even though that we were hugely outmanned by the British in naval power and soldiers and everything. So Endicott first had her students divide up into small groups to discuss primary and secondary articles to gain content knowledge and start developing ideas. After this, the class had an online debate, which Endicott says was helpful and that it allowed for the quieter students to speak out, as well as allowing for all students to have more time to kind of think through the responses and give deeper, more engaging responses. And finally, the students typed up a historical narrative analyzing what they had discussed in class and learned. Endicott again found that as she suspected, the cognitive and affective feelings were closely interrelated in historical empathy. So kind of the overarching takeaway from all these articles is that when done properly, historical empathy can be a very powerful, engaging tool. There are critics who say that it causes students to sympathize too much and they end up kind of with a distorted view of history, but overall it can be a good thing.